This is a reality news brief. Today, May 14th, at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, the Senate Banking Committee begins the markup for the Clarity Act. This is the moment where the March 17th regulatory framework, which already classified XRP as a digital commodity, is either codified into federal law or buried by procedural delays. If you've been wondering why the price of XRP has been compressed between 140 and 150 despite the ETF inflows, look no further than the Senate floor. The banking lobby has officially rejected the Stablecoin Compromise position just days ago, signaling that this legislative path is no longer a formality. It is a war. We are looking at a binary event that will define the second half of 2026. If the bill clears committee tomorrow, the path to a full Senate vote before the Memorial Day recess remains open. If it fails, the next window for this level of clarity won't open until 2030. The stakes couldn't be higher. Let's look at the friction. Senate Banking Chairman Tim Scott has pulled this markup forward after months of stalling. The pushback isn't coming from the SEC this time. It's coming from the legacy banking sector. They understand that if the Clarity Act passes, the legal distinction between a digital commodity and a security is locked. No future administration or rogue agency could unilaterally reverse it. This creates the mechanical necessity we discussed in video 71. When banks are forced to choose between a rotting legacy rail and a codified digital rail, they follow the law of efficiency. Currently, Polymarket has the odds of passage at 62%. That is a majority, but it is far from a certainty. The market is pricing in the risk of a stalemate. This is why the news feels heavy. The clarity we have now is judicial, but the clarity we need tomorrow is legislative. The institutional silence we are seeing right now is tactical. In the lead up to a major committee markup like the Clarity Act, liquidity often dries up as big players move to the sidelines. They aren't exiting their positions. They are waiting for the legislative go signal. Remember, the banking lobby isn't fighting XRP because it doesn't work. They are fighting it because it works too well. If the Clarity Act codifies that digital assets can bypass the traditional correspondent banking silos, the gatekeepers lose their toll booths. This Thursday isn't just a political debate. It is a battle over who controls the rails of the next decade. When you see the price hovering while the headlines turn red, don't mistake it for weakness. Mistake it for the system bracing for a structural pivot. We are moving from a world of permissioned growth to a world of mathematical certainty. We must address the ETF vacuum. Since the March launches, we have seen over $1 billion in net inflows into XRP-specific products. However, much of this liquidity is currently trapped in custody. It hasn't hit the open market because the large-scale institutional desks are waiting for the finality of the Clarity Act before they turn on the automated clearinghouses. This creates a massive imbalance. On one side, you have retail investors selling out of frustration. On the other, you have a growing pile of institutional capital waiting for the legislative green light to deploy. When those two forces collide, the result isn't a gradual climb. It is a mechanical gap. The news cycle wants you to focus on the if of the vote tomorrow, but the audit shows us the when of the liquidity release. The legacy financial system is currently operating on a zero-sum logic. They believe that for the new system to win, the old one must die. But the reality audit shows a different path. The legacy system isn't going to die. It is going to be absorbed. The Clarity Act provides the legal sponge for that absorption. By creating a clear federal definition for digital commodity assets, the U.S. government is effectively giving the green light for the multi-trillion-dollar repo markets to begin using XRP as high-quality collateral. This is the mechanical trigger that hasn't fired yet. We are talking about the plumbing of the shadow banking system. News doesn't move these markets. Necessity moves them. And right now, the necessity for a frictionless, instant settlement asset has never been higher. You can expect a flood of leaked reports and bearish sentiment. This is a standard coordination tactic to shake out weak hands before a major legislative shift. The banking lobby uses the media as a psychological tool to keep the price suppressed while they finish their own accumulation. If you look at the exchange reserves right now, they are at multi-year lows. The supply is being pulled off market while the public is being told to be afraid. This is the contrast loop in action. The public sees fear. The audit sees a supply shock. Tomorrow's vote is the catalyst, but the pressure has been building since the 2025 resolution. Do not let a 24-hour news cycle dictate a 10-year strategy. As we close chapter 1 of this brief, remember the goal: audit the reality, not the hype. Today at 10:30 a.m., when the gavels come down in the Senate, the speculation trap will either be locked or shattered. If the Clarity Act moves forward, we enter the era of institutional necessity. If it is delayed, we continue the period of accumulation. Either way, the plumbing remains the same. The global financial system cannot function on rotting rails forever. The shift is mechanical, and the timing is the only variable left. Stay focused on the data, ignore the coordinated noise, and prepare for the structural transition. In Chapter 2, we will dive into the specific friction costs that are forcing the bank's hands even as they publicly fight the bill. I'll see you in the next scene. To understand why the banking lobby is fighting so hard, you have to understand the cost of their current success. The legacy correspondent banking system is essentially a network of wooden crates. It's a system where capital must sit idle in pre-funded accounts across the globe just to ensure a payment can clear in 3 to 5 days. This is what we call dead capital. In 2026, with global liquidity tightening, banks can no longer afford to let trillions of dollars sit dormant. The efficiency trap is simple. The very system that gave them control is now the anchor dragging them down. They are fighting the Clarity Act publicly to maintain their monopoly, but privately, their treasury departments are desperate for the steel shipping container of the digital age. They need a neutral, bridge asset that eliminates the need for pre-funding. Think of the legacy system as a massive ocean liner trying to navigate a narrow canal. It's slow, it's expensive, and it requires constant tugboat assistance just to stay on course. XRP is the digital rail that allows that cargo to move at the speed of light without the ship. The contrast loop occurs when the public sees a bank CEO speak negatively about crypto on a news network, while that same bank's technical team is integrating the interledger protocol behind the scenes. They are talking down the price to buy themselves time to retrofit their infrastructure. If they can't stop the shift, they want to own the rails before the switch is flipped. This is why your audit must look at the patents and the partnerships, not the press releases. There is a mathematical tipping point where the cost of friction exceeds the cost of transition. For most of the Tier 1 banks, we hit that point in early 2026. The introduction of the Clarity Act markup tomorrow is the legal mechanism that allows them to move their pilot programs into production reality. When a bank transitions a payment corridor to XRP, they aren't just saving pennies, they are reclaiming millions in lost opportunity costs. This is the structural necessity that news watchers ignore. A legislative win tomorrow isn't just a win for retail investors, it's a release valve for the entire global financial system. The pressure in the old pipes has reached a level where a blowout is inevitable without a new path. Let's audit the steel container transition. In the shipping industry, the move to standardized containers reduced costs by over 90% and exploded global trade. The financial world is currently in its pre-container era. Every bank has its own ledger, its own rules, and its own delays. The mechanical shift is the standardization of value. When the Senate Banking Committee debates the markup tomorrow, they are debating the standards for the next 50 years of global commerce. If the US doesn't codify these rules now, the liquidity will simply flow to the jurisdictions that have. The capital doesn't care about borders, it cares about efficiency. This is the gravity that the banking lobby is trying to fight, and they are losing. The psychological weight of dead capital is something the average trader never considers. When a central bank sees its reserves losing value to inflation while sitting idle in a legacy settlement system, that creates a liquidity vacuum. They are looking for a high-velocity asset that can act as a bridge without the counterparty risk of a foreign sovereign currency. This is the neutrality of XRP. It doesn't belong to a nation, it belongs to the math of the network. As the Clarity Act approaches a vote, we are seeing the final attempt by legacy gatekeepers to keep that math illegal. But you cannot outlaw arithmetic. The efficiency gains are too large to be suppressed by a committee vote indefinitely. We must also address the risk-off sentiment that usually precedes these markups. The market is currently acting as if a no vote is a death sentence. It's not. A delay in the Clarity Act doesn't stop the mechanical necessity, it only delays the formalization of it. The institutions are already building the dark pools of liquidity that operate regardless of the headlines. If the markup stalls, the action simply moves further into the shadow banking sector, where retail has even less visibility. This is the shadow pivot. While you are watching the gavel, the liquidity is already finding its way through the cracks in the legacy floor. The audit proves the move is inevitable because the friction has become unsustainable. As we wrap up Chapter 2, look at the contrast between the fear in the headlines and the accumulation on the charts. We are seeing a massive absorption phase. The efficiency trap has closed on the legacy players, and their only way out is through the digital door. Tomorrow's vote is the key to that door, but the lock has already been picked by the sheer force of technological progress. In Chapter 3, we will dive into the mechanical trigger itself, the specific shadow banking friction, and the grease versus gears analogy that explains exactly how the liquidity flows once the legal barrier is removed. Prepare your project for the next block. The audit is just getting started. To understand the mechanical trigger, we must look past the price and into the shadow banking sector. Global finance is currently a machine where the gears are grinding against one another because the grease is missing. That grease is liquidity, specifically instant frictionless settlement. In the legacy world, banks use gears like correspondent accounts and the SWIFT messaging system. But these gears are dry. They require human intervention, manual reconciliation, and days of waiting. This grinding of gears is costing the global economy trillions in locked value. The mechanical trigger is the moment the system stops trying to fix the old gears and simply pours in the digital grease. XRP is that grease. It doesn't replace the bank. It allows the bank's gears to turn without heat, without friction, and without delay. Let's look at the collateral of last resort logic. In a financial crisis or even a period of extreme volatility, banks stop trusting one another's balance sheets. They demand high-quality collateral that can be settled instantly. Traditionally, this has been U.S. Treasuries. But in a digital 24/7 market, a Treasury bond that takes 24 hours to move is a liability, not an asset. The mechanical shift occurs when the system realizes it needs a neutral collateral that can move at the speed of a fiber optic cable. When the Clarity Act provides the legal framework, XRP stops being a speculative coin and becomes a high-quality liquid asset. This is the vacuum. When the pipes are empty, the first drop of liquidity doesn't just sit there, it is sucked in by the sheer force of the system's demand. The liquidity vacuum is a phenomenon where demand for settlement speed overrides the price of the asset. Think of a desert traveler who needs water. They don't care about the market price of the bottle. They care about the survival the water provides. Right now, the global banking system is thirsty. They are trapped in a high interest rate environment where the cost of borrowing settlement cash is skyrocketing. If they can settle a transaction for a fraction of a cent in 3 seconds using XRP, the price of the XRP itself becomes secondary to the savings found in the speed. The trigger is fired when the banks realize that holding XRP is actually cheaper than not holding it. We often hear about interoperability, but let's translate that into reality. It means the grease must work in every machine. Whether it is a central bank digital currency in Brazil or a private stablecoin in New York, the rails must be universal. The mechanical necessity of the XRP ledger is that it was built to be the universal adapter. While other networks are trying to build walled gardens, the audit shows that the institutions are gravitating toward the open rail. Why? Because it is the path of least resistance. Tomorrow's Senate markup is about deciding if the U.S. will participate in this universal standard or if it will remain a walled garden while the rest of the world automates. There is a specific type of friction called vostro and nostro account reconciliation. These are accounts that banks must hold in each other's currencies all over the world. It is the most inefficient way to move value ever devised. It is the wooden crate of finance. The mechanical trigger happens when a Tier 1 bank realizes they can close these accounts and free up billions in capital by using a single bridge asset. This is the grease working at a macro level. If one bank does it, the others must follow to remain competitive. Efficiency is a predatory force. It kills those who refuse to adapt. In 2026, we are also seeing the rise of permissioned liquidity pools. These are the shadow pipes where institutions trade digital assets away from the eyes of the retail public. The Clarity Act is the light switch for these pools. Once the bill passes, the legal risk is gone, and the pools can be filled with institutional capital. This is why the price action feels disconnected. The real volume is moving into these permissioned environments. The vacuum is being created behind a curtain. The audit proves the demand is there. The trigger is simply the removal of the legal stop sign. As we conclude Chapter 3, the picture should be clear. The machine is ready. The gears are in place. The vacuum has been created by years of legacy failure. All that is missing is the formal pouring of the grease. Tomorrow's vote in the Senate Banking Committee is the hand on the lever. Whether that lever is pulled tomorrow or next month, the mechanical necessity is a physical law of the market. In Chapter 4, we will look at the specific 2026 data audit, the XLS 80 impact, and the mathematical reality of what happens when the necessity for speed overrides the choice to wait. Prepare your next scene. We are moving into the liquidity trigger itself. The year 2026 will be remembered as the year of the liquidity vacuum. We are no longer theorizing about what might happen. We are auditing what is happening. The introduction of XLS 80 on the XRP ledger has fundamentally changed the nature of the asset. We have moved from a simple payment rail to a sophisticated automated market maker system that allows for permissioned institutional grade liquidity pools. This is the vacuum. In the legacy system, liquidity is fragmented and slow. Under the new protocol, liquidity is centralized, automated, and instant. The 2026 data audit shows that for every dollar of retail selling, we are seeing $3 of institutional absorption into these automated pools. The public sees a sideways chart. The audit sees a massive migration of supply into a digital vault. Let's look at the ETF effect as a mechanical constraint. By May 2026, the 7 US-based XRP spot ETFs have reached a combined total of $1.5 billion in net assets under management. Every time an institution or a retail investor buys a share of an ETF, the fund manager must go to the open market and purchase the underlying XRP. This is a one-way street. These institutions are not trading the asset, they are warehousing it. We are witnessing a collision between a fixed supply and a new, massive institutional demand source that doesn't care about the news cycle. The vacuum is created when the available supply on exchanges reaches a level that can no longer satisfy the daily create orders of the ETF providers. This is the definition of a supply shock. The XLS 80 protocol is the digital vault of this era. It allows for the tokenization of real-world assets, specifically high-yield credit and treasury bills, to be used as collateral directly on the ledger. This means that XRP is no longer just a bridge currency. It is the settlement layer for trillions in private credit. The data shows that in the first quarter of 2026, over $500 million in private credit was settled via these XLS 80 pools. This volume is silent because it happens in the institutional plumbing, far away from the speculative eyes of the retail exchanges. The audit reveals that the price discovery is being driven by utility, while the retail public is still focused on the court gavel. We must address the permissioned versus public divide. Many of you are frustrated because you don't see the volume on the public trackers. That is because the mechanical shift is happening in the permissioned corridors. These are closed-loop systems where banks trade with other banks using the XRP ledger as the backend. The 2026 audit shows that this institutional volume is growing at a rate of 40% month over month. The vacuum is being filled, but the tap is located behind the institutional curtain. The trigger occurs when these permission pools become so large that they must draw liquidity from the public market to maintain their reserves. That is the moment the private value meets the public price. The liquidity vacuum also affects the cost of capital. In a world where interest rates remain stubbornly high, the cost of moving money the old way is an anchor on global growth. The 2026 data confirms that the average cross-border transaction using the XRP rails is 80% cheaper than the legacy SWIFT equivalent. When you multiply that by the trillions of dollars in daily global settlement, the gravity of efficiency becomes irresistible. Banks are not adopting this because it's cool or new. They are adopting it because the old system is too expensive to survive. The vacuum isn't just about supply, it's about the survival of the institutions themselves. As we look at the 2026 data audit, one metric stands out: the velocity of the asset. While the price has remained relatively stable, the on-chain volume has reached all-time highs. This is the signature of a utility-driven market. In a speculative market, high volume leads to massive price swings. In a utility market, high volume leads to stability until the supply shock hits. We are currently in the stable phase of a utility-driven system. The vacuum is pulling in all the excess supply, preparing the stage for the next mechanical leg up. The audit shows that the floor is rising, even if the ceiling feels stuck. As we conclude Chapter 4, the mathematical reality should be undeniable. Between the XLS80 protocol, the ETF absorption, and the systemic move toward instant settlement, the liquidity vacuum is the most powerful force in the 2026 market. The trigger is no longer a maybe, it is a must. The system has been redesigned to require this asset. Tomorrow's Senate markup is simply the official recognition of a reality that the plumbing has already accepted. In Chapter 5, we will look at the systemic absorption, the final execution roadmap, and the mathematical repricing that occurs when necessity finally overrides choice. Stay disciplined. The audit is almost complete. We have reached the final stage of the audit, systemic absorption. This is the moment where the new system stops being a project and becomes the only system. In the history of technology, there is always a period of overlap where the old and new coexist. But eventually, the maintenance costs of the legacy infrastructure become so high that the old system is simply absorbed by the new one. The 2026 data indicates we are at that event horizon. The systemic absorption of XRP into the global settlement layer is not an event you will see on the evening news. It is a change in the fundamental math of how money moves. When the absorption is complete, the price is no longer driven by people buying and selling on retail exchanges. It is driven by the volume of value moving through the pipes. The mathematical repricing of a necessary asset follows a different set of rules than a speculative asset. In speculation, price is determined by the next buyer's willingness to pay more. In necessity, price is determined by the total liquidity required to settle the daily volume of the system. If the global settlement volume is trillions of dollars per day, the bridge asset must have a price high enough to accommodate those transfers without causing massive slippage. This is the floor that the institutions are calculating right now. The absorption phase is the process of moving the price from a speculative retail level to a functional institutional level. The trigger tomorrow is merely the formal acknowledgement that this transition is now legal policy. Let's look at the execution roadmap for the remainder of 2026. Following the Senate markup, the next milestone is the integration of the Unified Ledger Protocol. This is the bridge that connects the US spot ETFs, the permissioned bank pools, and the public XRP ledger. The roadmap shows that by the fourth quarter, we will see the first cross-border repo transactions settled entirely on-chain. This is the ultimate proof of concept. When a central bank uses a digital asset to settle a sovereign debt obligation, the speculation trap is shattered forever. We are no longer talking about if XRP works. We are looking at the execution of its primary design purpose. We must address the retail exit. Many investors will sell as soon as they see a 50 or 100% gain. They will feel they have won. But the audit shows that the institutions are the ones waiting to buy those exits. The systemic absorption relies on the transfer of supply from weak hands to locked vaults. Every time a retail investor exits out of fatigue or a small profit, an institutional pool is there to absorb that supply and move it into a long-term liquidity vault. This is the great rotation of 2026. The roadmap is designed to reward the patient and the informed, while the speculative noise is filtered out by the sheer duration of the transition. The final pivot is the transition to a digital asset-backed economy. As the Clarity Act is codified, we will see the emergence of tokenized credit. Your home, your car, and your business equity will eventually exist as tokens on a ledger. XRP is the rail that allows these tokenized assets to move between parties instantly. The absorption isn't just about crypto, it's about the digitization of all value. The 2026 audit confirms that the infrastructure is already built. The banks are ready. The laws are being marked up. The only thing left is for the mechanical pressure to reach the burst point. As we conclude this masterclass, I want you to look at your strategy through the lens of the audit. Are you positioned for the headlines or are you positioned for the plumbing? The news cycle is a distraction designed to keep you emotional. The plumbing is a mathematical certainty designed to keep the system running. The one trigger is the recognition that the legacy system can no longer function without the digital grease. Whether that recognition comes through a Senate vote tomorrow or a systemic failure next week, the outcome is the same. The necessity for efficiency is the most powerful force in human history. It cannot be stopped. Thank you for completing this video. We have audited the psychology, the friction, the mechanical trigger, and the systemic absorption. You now have the roadmap for the remainder of 2026. Stay disciplined, trust the data, and remember that the reset is only for those who are still using the old model. We are moving into a new era of financial transparency and mechanical necessity. I am Diana, and this has been the XRP Reality Audit. I will see you in the next brief as we watch the Clarity markup unfold in real time. The audit is closed.